And there's a screen here. The screen?
Oh, okay. And
So
we have to use the mics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But they'll be on the AV people take care of that.
Okay, great.
And these have your notes in them.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't
Oh, no.
get it. No.
That would be perfect. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks.
Good morning. and welcome to the National Archives, and thanks for joining us here in the McGowan Theater for the Freedom of Information Act Advisory Committee. I'm David Ferriero, the Archivist of the United States, and a special welcome to our committee. Thanks for being here. At the inaugural committee meeting of its third two-year term this September, the committee established 3 topics to explore over the next 2 years: time and volume, the vision for a future FOIA, and records management. Subcommittees for each of these 3 topics are busy meeting and gathering information to prepare recommendations to me on ways to improve the administration of FOIA. The subcommittee's quest for information about FOIA fits squarely with a presentation today by 2 professors who will discuss their work at how examining recent trends in the data can inform future research. I'm pleased to welcome Khaldoun Abu-Ashi of American University and Tina Nabachi of Syracuse University to discuss their research involving data from agency annual FOIA reports. I'd also like to welcome Dr. James Stoker, a historian of U.S. foreign relations and modern Middle Eastern history, who I recently appointed to this committee to fill a seat vacated by Andrew Johns. Dr. Stoker, who teaches at Trinity Washington University here in D.C., has filed hundreds of FOIA requests and mandatory declassification review requests, and is no stranger to this building, our facility in College Park, and to 9 presidential libraries where he has conducted research. So welcome to the FOIA Advisory Committee, and I look forward to your perspective and contributions to this important committee. Last week, in celebration of Sunshine Week, I had a conversation on the stage with Beryl Howell, Chief Judge for the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. Judge Howell reminded us that FOIA officers and personnel within every agency are the unsung heroes of the Freedom of Information Act, who aren't told thank you very much and need support of agency leadership, including increased resources. So I thank all of you for the work that you do to improve FOIA through your perspectives from both inside and outside in government. Your time and continued effort and commitment to improving the FOIA process are greatly appreciated. And now I'll turn you over to Elaine Asimo, Director of the Office of Government Information Services.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for today's 3rd meeting of the 2018-2020 term of the FOIA Advisory Committee, whether you're here in person, via telephone, or via live stream. And hopefully we have 2 committee members on the phone. Actually, would like to just check in to make sure. Sarah Kotler, are you there?
I am.
And hi, Sarah. And Abby?
Hi.
Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. Good morning. So I'm very excited to kick off this meeting. It's hard to believe that June 6, 2019 will mark the halfway point of our committee term, so hopefully everyone is very busy. I really look forward to hearing from the subcommittees as to their progress. And I particularly want to thank everyone for getting back to work so quickly, especially after many of us were affected by the 5-week government shutdown. Kind of put everyone back in a lot of ways, and we completely understand that everyone is a little backed up. So a warm welcome, of course, to Dr. James Stoker, who, as everyone now knows, the archivist appointed earlier this month after Andrew Johns resigned. We will miss Andrew, but we have an important seat to fill. James fills the seat representing the interests of historians and history-related organizations. As David mentioned, he fits both of those as a frequent user of FOIA to research U.S. foreign relations and modern Middle Eastern history. He's also a member of the Society for Historians of American Foreign Relations. And we have posted a complete biography of James on our FOIA Advisory Committee page. If you don't like it, let us know. Okay. So today, we barely made a quorum. It'd make Kirsten a little bit nervous. But unfortunately, Lizette Cotillius, Chris Knox, Ginger McCall, and Melanie Pastay are not able to join us today. But we do have a quorum. Good news. We do have a very robust agenda today. Hopefully everyone has a copy. And as I always do, we'll try to move things along and make sure we end on time or perhaps a little bit early. A few housekeeping notes that I always have to go through. Bear with me. As most of you know, the FOIA Advisory Committee, which reports to the Archivist of the United States, provides a forum for public discussion of FOIA issues and offers members of the public an opportunity to provide their feedback and ideas for improving the FOIA process. We encourage public comments, suggestions, and feedback that you may submit at any time by emailing foia-advisory-committee@nara.gov. At the end of today's meeting, we will have time for public comments, and we look forward to hearing from any non-committee members who have thoughts or comments to share with the committee. An OJS staff member, Sheila Portanovo, our attorney advisor, hi Sheila, will be monitoring the live stream throughout the meeting. So if you're watching us on the NARA YouTube channel and have any comments or questions, please submit them, and we will be able to read them out loud during the public comment period. To promote openness, transparency, and public engagement, we post committee updates and information to our website, blog, and on Twitter at @FOIA_ombuds. Stay up to date on the latest OJS and FOIA Advisory Committee news, activities, and events by following us on social media. I have a special note from Kirsten to mention that today we just posted our weekly blog. Patricia Weth is featured. Getting to know the FOIA Advisory Committee is our feature. We're trying to pick, a member every few weeks to feature, and Michael Morrissey is up next. So we're going to we need a government person next. We're trying to take turns. Lee White volunteered for the next one, so your turn will come. Information about the committee, including members' biographies, committee documents, are all available on the FOIA Advisory Committee webpage under the 2018-2020 term, link on the OJS website. We are live streaming this meeting, and we'll make the video, transcript, and meeting materials available on the committee's page as soon as possible. We expect to have all materials related to this meeting available on our website within 30 days. Before I introduce our guests today, we need to approve the minutes from the last meeting, which Kirsten sent around to everyone. We did receive some clarifying edits, which Kirsten incorporated. She and I have certified the minutes to be accurate and complete, which we are required to do under the Federal Advisory Committee Act within 90 days of the November meeting. So do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
No second required. I'm happy to take one anyway. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Those on the telephone, Sarah and Abby. Voting? Aye?
Aye.
Okay. There wasn't a second aye.
We don't need you.
We don't need it. All right, so they're approved. We will post them on our website. We will take a break approximately halfway through our meeting at about 11:15 a.m., during which time you may wish to purchase food or drink from the Charters Cafe located on this level. As a reminder, no food or drink is allowed in the theater. Also, please note there are restrooms directly outside the theater and another set near the cafe. Also, I'm going to once again give a quick but very important message from our sponsors, the AV folks, who make things run so smoothly. We did have some issues, as some of you know, in our first meeting, so we're really trying very hard to look and memorize the instructions on these sheets that we have put by the microphones. It makes for easier sound and easier transcription of the minutes down the road, and they are important. I have to confess I sometimes forget them, so I'll keep looking at them. Most importantly, I think keeping wireless devices away is really important. I think it kind of sets it off. Move the mic back when you're done speaking, and you can read the rest. Don't sneeze, sigh, or clear your throat. That's another one of my favorites. I will work to check in frequently with Sarah and Abby on the phone. If I forget, Sarah and Abby, please remind me. I also know there's still a little bit of a lag time between the time the mics go off in the room and the folks on the phone can be heard, so be patient on that. Please remember to state your name before speaking every single time. Again, I'm guilty of that. I'm working on that very hard. This also helps tremendously with our post-meeting minutes. This meeting is also being closed captioned, and by following all these instructions, we will be able to make this public meeting accessible to all, making it easier also, as I said, for our meeting minutes to be more efficient afterwards. Any questions? Okay. So I am now ready to launch into our first presentation. We have some wonderful speakers with us here today. We are going to be welcoming Professor Khaldoun Abouassi. Did I pronounce that correctly? Okay. Of American University, and Professor Tina Nabachi of Syracuse University. OGIS introduced itself to Professor Abouassi and Professor Nabachi last summer after they published their research on recent trends in FOIA administration and the American Review of Public Administration. At that time, we had a lively discussion about their work and how it intersected with OGIS's interests, as well as the work of the FOIA Advisory Committee. Their research, they hope, will inform future research by identifying areas that deserve additional attention. I understand that since the article was published last May, Professor Abouassi and Professor Nabachi have studied more recent data in the annual FOIA reports. As a reminder, of course, annual FOIA reports are mandated by the FOIA statute. I understand that they have some additional findings they will share with us today. We thought that bringing them together with the FOIA Advisory Committee would be mutually beneficial. In addition to asking questions that we're going to be asking them, hopefully everyone has come up with some, they have some questions for us. I have no idea what they are. They did not tell me in advance. We do hope this will lead to an interesting and lively discussion for the next hour, and one that by no means has to end today. It can certainly continue in the future, and we very much welcome that. Their slides of their PowerPoint are in your packet, as are all of the other slides in today's meeting, and we will be posting them on the website under the FOIA Advisory Committee 1820 tab. One more minute, I'm going to now introduce your backgrounds, so bear with me. So Professor Khaldoun Abouassi is an assistant professor of public administration and policy at the School of Public Affairs at American University, where he has taught since 2015. We have a couple of American University alums here, so they're very happy to see you. He is also a research fellow at Arizona State University's Center for Organizational Research and Design. His research focuses on nonprofit and public management from a comparative perspective, examining organizational capacity, resources, and interorganizational relations. Dr. Abouassi serves in leadership positions at several professional organizations, including the American Society for Public Administration and the Association for Public Policy Analysis and Management. He earned his PhD in public administration at the Maxwell School of Syracuse University and his master's and bachelor's degrees at the American University of Beirut, Lebanon. The rest of his bio and his CV is all available on the American University website. Professor Tina Nabachi is the Joseph A. Strasser Endowed Professor in Public Administration and an Associate Professor of Public Administration and International Affairs at Syracuse University. She is also a Faculty Research Associate at PARC. I love that acronym, Program for the Advancement of Research on Conflict and Collaboration, an area, of course, near and dear to OGIS's heart. Her research focuses on citizen participation, collaborative governance, conflict resolution, and challenges in public administration. Dr. Nabachi is on the editorial boards of numerous public administration and conflict resolution journals and serves as the co-chair of the International Institute of Administrative Sciences study groups on co-production of public services and quality of governance. Something that caught my attention is that Dr. Nabachi was a central member on the civil society team that assessed progress on the Obama administration's implementation of the public participation commitments in the Open Government National Action Plans. As most of you may recall, this very committee was born out of the December 2013 National Action Plan 2.0, where there was a commitment made to establish a FOIA Modernization Advisory Committee. Dr. Nabachi earned her PhD in 2007 from Indiana University in Bloomington, her master's degree from the University of Vermont, and her bachelor's degree from American University. Please welcome Khaldoun and Tina. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction. Khaldoun and I are thrilled to be here. I'm not sure if I should be looking at the audience or looking at the committee. I'll try to pay attention to both as we're talking. It's really an honor and pleasure for us to be here to talk with you about our FOIA research. We understand that the committee has received a copy of the paper, and we're happy to share that paper with anybody else who'd like it. It's been published at the American Review of Public Administration. And we want to spend a little bit of time this morning talking about some of our findings, but also talking with you about what next steps we might take in advancing particularly empirical research around FOIA and the administration of FOIA in our federal agencies. as you all know, FOIA is the law that keeps citizens in the know about their government. It has a long and rich history over the past 50 years. It's really become seen as a pillar of democratic governance, not just in the United States, but in nations around the world that also have freedom of information laws. FOIA is seen as a law that helps improve transparency, accountability, responsiveness, and citizen trust in government. It's also thought to reduce corruption, to reduce other ethical violations, and shape economic activities. And we've seen since 1966 numerous amendments in FOIA and the FOIA law, this acting as kind of a pendulum swinging back and forth between enabling public access to information and constraining that access, protecting government secrecy. Khaldun and I became really interested in this in 2016 because it was the 50th anniversary of FOIA, and we thought, oh, what an interesting time to start examining Freedom of Information Act, looking at what's happening, especially as we were transitioning out of the Obama administration that put such a premium on transparency, and moving into a new administration. We thought it would be great to kind of assess where we are, and we started looking through the literature and realized that there was actually very little empirical research done about FOIA. There's been quite a bit of legal research around FOIA, research around the political aspects of FOIA, research around the normative claims of FOIA and what FOIA does, but very little that assessed what the empirical impacts of FOIA. And so we thought, wow, this would be a great opportunity for us to start asking the question of what do we know about FOIA? And because we're public administration scholars, we love what happens inside the bureaucracy. We thought it would be great to look particularly at the administration and management of FOIA, what happens inside those agencies. But we quickly discovered that doing that research is actually quite difficult because the data don't exist for it, and the data are very hard to collect. So we started looking through FOIA.gov, and what we decided that we would do is to conduct an empirical analysis of aggregate trends. And we thought this was important because regardless of what the political winds are around transparency and access to information, thousands of public managers are engaged on a daily basis in the management of FOIA activities. And we thought it was very important to understand what that looked like to help improve the processing of FOIA. So we wanted to look at aggregate trends in the FOIA.gov data to discover commonalities and anomalies across different agencies, to identify key characteristics in the process, and really to create a benchmark for future efforts. When we started out, we wanted to do either in-depth case studies or some more targeted empirical analyses, but we realized we couldn't do that until we had a big picture understanding of what was happening in the government as a whole, and so that's where we started with this research. So we milked FOIA.gov. Actually, Khaldun did all of that hard work, right? Getting on FOIA.gov, which is an incredible database of FOIA cases. He downloaded and curated data from 102 federal agencies, collated all of that into an Excel spreadsheet, and we used all the data that were on the website at the time, from 2008 to 2016. We know that this is a limited time span, right? This is 8 years of data. We also know that these are descriptive statistics. We can't do causal inferences now. We can't say something caused something else. They're aggregate level analyses, and we don't have data on individual cases. Despite those limitations, we thought it was really important to see what was happening in FOIA. And so we took all of the data and we broke it into two broad categories. One category that is about caseloads, the caseload data, the number of requests that come in, how many exemptions are granted, how many denials there are, appeals, backlogs. And then we also had a category around management capacity, and we're using that term a little bit loosely, but really to capture the number of staff involved in FOIA administration, financial costs of administering FOIA, and processing times. And so here are some of the things we found. We'll start with caseload data first. So this is a chart showing the number of requests and FOIA requests received and the number of cases in the backlog from 2008 to 2016. And you can see that there has been a fairly steady increase in both the number of requests received and backlogged requests over time. And this is interesting, but we thought, wouldn't it be nice to understand where these requests are going? So this is a chart, a very colorful chart, showing the top 10 agencies that receive the most annual requests per year. And you can see NARA is on there quite frequently, the little yellow box. There are 6 agencies that are on this list every year, including 5 cabinet-level agencies: the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Defense, Health and Human Services, and the VA, and 1 independent agency, the Social Security Administration. By far, when we break this down and we really look at it, Homeland Security receives the most requests, with over 200,000 requests each year. That's a lot of requests to manage. We see far more variation at the bottom of this top 10 list. What we think is really interesting here, though, is that most agencies on this list deal with individual federal benefits or claims. So Health and Human Security, HHS, VA, EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Social Security Administration, or they are agencies that deal with law enforcement and security issues like DHS, DOD, DOJ. So this really suggested to us that the nature of the request and perhaps the nature of the work performed by the agency itself were really important variables to examine when studying FOIA administration. We also looked at the number of requests that were granted or denied, and we looked at fully granted, fully denied, and then those partially granted, partially denied requests. And the percentage of fully denied requests has remained fairly stable over time, perhaps with that exception of 2016, when about 45% of the requests were fully denied. But what's interesting is this middle category of partially granted, partially denied requests has changed sharply over time. And it's unclear whether these changes are a function of external issues, things around the types and the nature of the requests made, or if they're about internal management issues in the agency. We just don't have the data available to suggest this. And we would need to really collect additional data to understand what's happening there. We thought it would be interesting to look at the reasons for denials. Only one of the reasons on here, the absence of records needed, is falls within the realm of agency control. And so the most common reasons for denials of claims are issues around things having to do with the process itself or the request that is made by the requester, right? So it's more of the external issue that needs to be addressed. Although we still think that there are some really interesting issues to look at around how agencies manage their application processes, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So all in all, when we think about caseloads, we have a couple of observations, and that's really that a minority of agencies are receiving and managing a majority of requests and appeals, and they handle a majority of that backlog. As we started really looking through the data, we believe that the nature or purpose of the request, the nature of the work performed by the agency are really important variables in determining not only the number of caseload content, but also how those are managed. The denials relate more to the requester and the application process rather than the agency, which we think is actually good news because that can be changed with some process things. But caseload is not distributed equally across agencies. And so we thought for this reason it was really important to look at management capacity. And by the way, if there are any questions, feel free to jump in and ask them. So we started looking at management capacity, and one of the first things we did was look at staff. And so this chart shows the ratio of FOIA employees, both full-time and equivalent full-time employees, to FOIA cases. And what we can see is that across the federal government, there is one employee for approximately every 188 FOIA cases, FOIA requests. That seems like a really big difference there to manage. We have almost 65% of FOIA staff located in 6 agencies: the VA, HHS, Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, USDA, and DOD. But there really still appears to be this imbalance in the total number of full-time staff and the number of cases. And by the way, 19 agencies have no full-time FOIA staff at all, which we thought was very interesting. We also looked at the costs of FOIA, and we want to be very, very clear here that we are not making any normative arguments about this. We are just simply reporting facts. We are not making judgments here about the cost of FOIA as being too much or too low. We looked here at two types of costs. One are processing costs, and these are the costs of things like duplicating expenses, the personnel time needed to review documents, pull documents, reproduce documents, search for them. And then litigation costs are the costs associated with litigation when initiated by requesters in response to a full or partial denial. And what we see here are some steady but fairly large processing and litigation costs. The total costs of FOIA, for example, in 2016 were over $500 million. And so this for the total costs of doing that. And there does not appear, as we did more data analysis, to be a correlation between the number of requests, appeals, or employees and the costs. We also looked at costs in terms of the fees collected and uncollected. As many of you know, fees can be charged for FOIA work to recover the cost of 3 FOIA-related activities: document duplication, searching for documents, and reviewing documents to determine whether any portion is exempt from disclosure. You can request a fee waiver under 2 fairly strict conditions if the request does not serve personal or commercial interests, or the request serves a broader public interest. And what we see here is that the collected fees, which are the red lines, constitute less than 1% of the total costs of administering FOIA. So there are quite a number of uncollected costs with FOIA management. Finally, we looked at the time, average processing time in days, the APD, for both simple FOIA requests and complex FOIA requests. And what we see is over time, the number of days required for simple requests has been fairly stable, although you see great fluctuation when you start looking at individual agency data. Some agencies have incredibly high APDs for simple requests. Some agencies have made tremendous progress in reducing that processing time over the past several years. But complex requests have varied pretty tremendously, from a low of 69 days in 2009 to a high of 123 in 2013. And there's a lack of correlation here when we start looking at the number of requests received and the processing time. And so it really raises very interesting questions about what's happening inside an agency, that some agencies are better able to process these requests than others. Is that a management issue? Is that a nature of request issue? What's happening? And again, we don't have the data, but these data and these findings really suggest some interesting places to look. So some final observations about management capacity. It's pretty clear that the capacity, at least in terms of staff, is not equally distributed across government agencies, and that the relationship between the staff time and FOIA cases, it's not straightforward. There's a lot of internal processing things that are shaping what's happening here in terms of costs and time. And we see tremendous variation here, and this really leads us to think that we have to do some more in-depth case studies to understand what's happening with FOIA administration. So I'll just say a couple more things, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague Khaldun to talk about our future research. But we know, as we're doing this is just straightforward reporting of numbers, and there's a lot that's unaccounted for. FOIA and the number of FOIA requests responds to all sorts of external things happening in society. So historical events, politics, economic issues, all of these shape the number of requests that come into agencies, and we're not accounting for that here. We're just doing straightforward reporting of numbers. We also realize that there are huge cost and capacity issues with FOIA. FOIA is not a central aspect of agencies' missions, and it's not reflected in performance measures and budgets. And so this is, I don't want to call it an unfunded mandate, but it's something agencies have to do that also requires a tremendous amount of resources. And it's done for social benefit, right? So we're not making normative claims there, but this creates some really interesting, very, we think, juicy tensions in agencies. There's also a tremendous need for more research, right? Aggregate research of what's happening at the federal government level as a whole, and also in-depth case studies looking at what's happening in particular agencies. If we can learn about what some agencies are doing to help better manage FOIA requests, to be more responsive, to be more transparent, or even just to process things faster, those lessons can be shared with other agencies and ultimately improve the administration and management of FOIA. So we really feel that there is a need to continue data collection around FOIA, and particularly FOIA.gov. So we want to see this expand into the future, but we also have, I will confess, a little bit of a self-interest in figuring out how we can fit some data into FOIA.gov. Can we start, we know we have the data in the agency reports, it's not easily accessible there. Can we start transcribing that and getting that into FOIA.gov so we have more of a historical record and can understand those shifts over time? So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Khaldun, to talk a little bit more about our future research.
So based on our published paper and based on the presentation that we made in several places, there were some questions that came up, and probably these are the questions that we would like to ask you. These are not our observations, but more, again, they are statement versus questions. And as Tina mentioned, that FOIA appears to be an administrative obligation of some sort. It's on top of all the missions that the organizations have to fulfill. So that is another layer that they need to attend to. And as we mentioned earlier, as Tina mentioned earlier, the cost, although we're not making any normative statement here, but the cost is of almost $500 million. And is FOIA a financial burden? And who is really carrying that burden? The agencies or the taxpayers? And related to this question, or the first question, is the fact, well, is FOIA a tool for information sharing or information dissemination? Or is FOIA a tool for engagement, engaging the public with the federal agencies, without ignoring the fact that FOIA can also be used for various advocacy and lobbying purposes? All of that we need to keep in mind, and that is going to somehow affect the way we might want to think about introducing changes to ensure greater efficiency in the administration of FOIA. And as Dina mentioned, in terms of the time it's taking, the backlog that we are witnessing, so what kind of changes that might be introduced that can help better serve the purpose of FOIA as a tool for information, a tool of engagement versus advocacy, and to somehow lessen the financial burden on agencies. So based on all of this, we started asking ourselves, is FOIA or is the administration of FOIA really impacted by certain processes characteristics or organizational characteristics? Is the administration of FOIA related to the agency itself and what kind of capacity the agency has? Or is it related to the process and the request and the requesters and the nature of the request and so on? So we developed this brief table of different organizational and process characteristics. For the organizational characteristics, we are talking about the field or the nature of the work of each agency. We are talking about the capacity in terms of the number of staff, both full-time FOIA staff as well as the total number of FOIA staff. We're talking about the structure of the agency itself, how large or small the agency is, but also how FOIA is administered in each agency. Is there one central office that is responsible, what kind of structure that office has, and so on. On the other hand, the process characteristics, we are talking here about the type of requester. Is it an individual, an organization? What kind of an organization? What is the purpose of the request? Again, is it for individual purposes, for research purposes, or other purposes? The clarity and the complexity of request. And again, this was reflected in some of the data. The cost of the request, if there is a cost associated with the request, if a fee was waived, or if the cost was actually collected. And the last process characteristic is the means of request. How is FOIA being submitted? We know that some agencies are moving to the online submission through FOIA.gov, but there are other mechanisms or means of submission. And here, as Tina mentioned, it would be really interesting for us as researchers to have data that goes back to the 1980s, where we will be able to compare what was the submission process back then, how it was, and how it changed throughout the year, and if that has affected the administration of FOIA. So what we did, basic analysis at this stage to see if there's any kind of correlation between what we are seeing in terms of the number of requests received as well as the backlog, taking some of the organizational characteristics into account. And we focus on the number of requests received throughout the years from 2008 till 2016, as well as the number of FOIA backlog. And this is, again, these are simple correlations among some variables. So we noticed that the number of requests received is highly correlated and significantly correlated with the number of full-time FOIA employees, the total number of full-time FOIA staff, as well as the gross BA, which is the funding available for obligations, as well as with the outlays, which are the actual expenditures of each agency. In terms of the number of FOIA backlog, we only found that there's high and significant correlation and positive correlation between the backlog and the number of full-time FOIA employees and a total number of full-time FOIA staff. What this tells us, and again, these are really basic preliminary results, is that if we think about FOIA, the number of staff, even the budget of the organizations in terms of the gross BA and the gross outlays, as measurements of organizational size, the results indicate that the size is positively correlated with both the number of requests received. So the bigger the organization, the more number of requests the organization receives during the year. But if we also think about the number of staff as a measurement of organizational capacity, then the results somehow contradict what we might expect, because organizational size is should likely to be negatively correlated with the number of backlog. But here we're seeing that the more staff or the more employees, the higher the number of the FOIA backlog. So this is something that requires future investigation, and we are trying to work our way around these results and try to understand them. And I hope that the questions that we posted before, as well as the issue of organizational capacity and organizational size, might be subjects for some feedback from you that would help us in our future steps. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was a lot to absorb. I think we're all kind of absorbing still.
Sure.
I just want to open up the floor to the committee, and feel free to ask questions, engage, run away in horror. Does anyone have any first thoughts or observations?
Although this is a public,
This is Tom Sussman.
Tom Sussman talking. You've got some great stuff, terrific material, but I'd love to see a little more analysis and judgment on it. I mean, for example, you talk about costs and the high cost and the fact that that cost is that it's non-mission based funding at $500 million, and people reading that would say, "Wow, that'll blow us away. Maybe we should be doing less." And I just went online. Military bands, $500 million, non-mission based. Okay,
Yeah.
So I mean, in context, it's a lot less frightening.
Absolutely. $500 million is really kind of a drop in the bucket when you start thinking about things, and you start thinking about, and we really stressed we didn't want to make normative judgments about this because we believe in FOIA. I mean, to be totally transparent about that, FOIA is a critical law, freedom of information and access to information. It is a pillar of democracy. We absolutely believe in that. And so we wanted to hold off on making those judgments, particularly with the kind of data that we had. Right, because we didn't have enough to understand what's really going on, and we're working through that list of process and organizational characteristics. It's quite painstaking to create a database for 102 federal agencies capturing that information over time. So that's where we're at now. So we'll give you judgment in the future.
Good. Okay. A second observation, which I thought was really interesting, you talked about personal information, benefits and claims constituting the most requests, along with, I guess, national security and criminal law enforcement issues. And then a few pages later, you talk about costs could be reduced where they're more proactive release, and that's something that this committee has been very interested in, proactive release. But those two don't match.
Right.
You can't proactively release information on costs and benefits, which suggests that something else needs to be done in those agencies with high numbers of requests for individual information. And I guess that's an area for recommendations and judgment, because that's a tougher problem, especially in the benefits and costs area, because we have members of the committee involved in immigration and Social Security areas, and those shouldn't be case-by-case request and response FOIA issues.
Right. I think that's such, sorry to jump in, but I think that's such an interesting observation, and I don't know that we would have been able to identify that without doing this kind of aggregate level work. And so in the paper, we have a lot more nuanced reporting of what our findings mean and potential suggestions that we didn't go into here. And I think exploring that, what could potentially be done with these agencies that are getting high numbers of individual requests, looking at their processing times, we now know that that's an area to look at. The committee hopefully now knows that that might be somewhere where you could suggest changes to processing. But prior to the analysis, we didn't know that it was an issue.
And just quickly, we did not have the data for the proactive releases because it was only available actually after we published the paper. So it's something that we also might want to look into and see how it might be correlating or interacting with the other data that we have.
Absolutely. Great points. Thanks.
Bradley White, DHS. We're number one. I have two questions. First, one of the things that we at DHS are trying to track, in part because of our huge caseload, is the number of pages that each of our components and DHS as a whole tracks. Do you know if any other agencies are tracking that data, and have you thought to look into that at all?
I don't think that the data is available. We might need to submit a FOIA request to get the data.
Do that to everyone but DHS. We're good. And my second question is, when you were looking at the staffing and workload rates, I have to confess, when I saw, I think it was 1 to 188 requests, I thought, wow, that's really low. Only because when I worked at ICE, for example, we had a weekly quota of between 35 and 50 FOIA requests each week per analyst. So that can really vary. And have you looked into that variance between, say, an agency the size of DHS or one of the really small agencies?
So we have not in this paper, but it is something on our to-do list.
Thank you.
Yeah. It would be great, I think, to look really more closely at what's happening inside of those agencies, because that ratio probably fluctuates tremendously depending on where you are. And as for the pages, it would be great if that data were available. So if you want to add that to FOIA.gov, we approve.
Hi, this is Patricia Weth, NLRB. I just wanted to say I'm really impressed by your research. As somebody who works on the annual report for her agency and past agencies, it was just really impressive to see it compiled all together. And nothing that you said surprised me. I mean, it all seemed right on the money. But there was one point in your discussion topics, you have cost and capacity issues. FOIA is not central to agency missions and not reflected in performance measures and budgets. And you used a term which I liked, it caused a juicy tension, I believe is what you said. And I've seen that at agencies, and I think it takes it takes getting your leadership on board and really educating the leadership about it. Yes, it may not be the agency's mission, but you know, it's a statute that we have to comply with. And it's very important. So I think there's a real educational piece for us there. And, you know, that kind of helps us increase our budget so that we do get the resources that we need. But the other thing that you've mentioned, that it's not reflected in performance measures. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. So I do think FOIA is a juicy tension. It creates tensions between these core public values that we want to see in public administration. On the one hand, we value efficiency. We want our agencies to be efficient in their processes and their products and the workload they're doing. But FOIA, which represents the value of transparency, sometimes it puts those values in conflicts: transparency and efficiency. And when we talk about agency performance, there are all sorts of performance metrics out there, but agencies aren't being evaluated or assessed or appraised on their ability to effectively manage FOIA requests. They're not being celebrated or criticized for whether they're responding to FOIA requests in a timely manner, whether they're proactively releasing the information they can. And so without those kinds of performance incentives, it's not central to what the agency does, I guess.
So I want to add first, thank you for working on the reports, because that makes the life of some of us easier, although they are, I would like them to be in a more accessible way. But you mentioned really something important, which is you need the leadership to be on board. And so this is important to actually take a look at and it will be on our research agenda, how much leadership plays a role. But also something that we might want to consider in our future research is going to be also the satisfaction of the employees in each federal agencies, and how much that relate in a certain way to the backlog of processing FOIA. So in your case, if you have 50 cases a week, right? Well, how much happy I'm going to be at the end of each week? And we have some data from the surveys from the satisfaction of the federal employees that we can actually combine with this data set.
Patricia with NLRB. I just sat through a meeting regarding the evaluations for my branch, so it's always bittersweet. I learn a lot, so yeah, I can see that being helpful. There was one other point that you made, which I believe was interesting. You had talked about who is carrying the burden of the cost of FOIA, and you said, is it the government or the taxpayers? And I feel it's both. I mean, you know, the taxpayers paying our salary, so yeah. I mean, you all know well from your research that any cost that we receive from FOIA does not come even close to covering.
Correct, not at all. Yes, you're right. You're right. The cost is being covered by the government and the taxpayers. But again, so since we don't have information about the requesters, we don't know who might be paying that small amount. Is it organizations or is it individuals? So that's what we are also interested in.
Thank you very much.
Emily Creighton at the American Immigration Council. I wanted to just ask a question that I think maybe you can help me better understand how, if you are working with aggregate data, there may be a way for you to FOIA or to at least speak with some of the agencies about how they keep their records so that you could better understand how to get at some of the data that is individual data. We have a research department, and that's a struggle on our end as well to best understand. And the head of our research department often says, I don't want to see the aggregate data. We're going to have to wait until we get the individual data to really make us, sort of conclude things about how the immigration system works. So I wondered if there was an opportunity to FOIA, if there was a sample size or some way that you could do that without asking for everything. Sure. And then when you talk about the costs, I wondered, I mean, we are at some points litigating some of our FOIAs, and I know that it's, when you look at the actual dollars, I'm just wondering if the litigation itself, it might be a rich area for research, and it might not be that this is something that you're able to undertake to think about not just the dollars, but the resources and how intensive that is for those FOIA offices to manage the litigation, and how it's prioritized, and how it, just how that sort of fits in, apart from the dollars, the actual, man and women time spent analyzing those and addressing those lawsuits.
So we are, as Tina mentioned at the beginning, the whole idea was we wanted to do more of a case study, take a federal agency and really go interview them and see what is going on. But then we said, well, before we do that, we need to get the bigger picture. But it's on our to-do list as well to, besides if we can actually ask or submit FOIA requests for all the agencies, which might not be too practical, we might select a certain specific agency and do interviews and also submit a FOIA request. And we invite, if you would like to volunteer your agencies, we're more than happy to work with you on the next steps.
Emily Creighton, I was just going to say, also, please reach out to the requester community. We have a lot of information about and work that we've done and to better understand how records are kept at the various agencies. And I would say with the Department of Homeland Security, you mentioned that there is a sort of law enforcement angle there, and maybe there's a connection to the number of requests. And I would just mention there that a large number of requests to DHS have to do with individual files for immigration records on behalf of individuals. That really has to do with just how the immigration system works, and how that's how they access their data. That is the only way that they can access their records. So just to keep in mind some of the agency-specific realities that the requester community could certainly help educate you about.
So you're tapping into this really great issue that Khaldun and I debated back and forth for weeks when we decided to start doing that, and that is, do we look at the agency as a whole, all of HHS, or do we start looking at the units within the agencies, because there's going to be variation within those units as well? And so then we thought, okay, well, let's pick one agency, but we didn't know which agency would be the sexiest agency to look at because we didn't know what all of the aggregate data were. And so I think with a lot of this, it helps inform some sampling strategies around where might be interesting cases to look at. If you're more interested in the staff side of things, you might want to look in A, B, and C. If you're more interested in the process and nature of the requests, look at E, F, and G. And so it was this aggregate stuff that allowed us to really start thinking about those case selection and sampling strategy protocols, which we're excited about for stage 2.
And also, if we go that route, then we might want to compare between at least two agencies, depending on, like, even within the same agency, maybe two different departments or so on, but across agencies. And regarding your second question about the litigation costs and so on, there's more data probably on FOIA.gov that we did not include in this paper because of the page limit and word limit of journals. But also we have, there's a nonprofit in Syracuse that has compiled the litigation cases. And this is again on our to-do list in the future.
Right.
So it's a good idea. Yeah.
Track, you're referring to track?
Thank you. Yes,
Yep.
track.
I know there are two folks lined up, but I just want to look to the folks on the phone. Sorry, this is Alina Asimo. Sarah, Abby, do you guys have any questions? I don't want to ignore you.
No questions from me, thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Abby?
No questions from me either.
Okay. All right, I think Jason is next, and then Lee. Oh, and then
Jason
James.
Barrett. I was there as a lawyer, and now I'm in private practice. Your two slides on caseloads, requests granted, denied, and reasons for denials. When I first saw the slide, the first thought I had was that you were talking about requests that were granted in the sense that actually records were released to requesters versus denied records withheld. That's not what's going on here. It's simply a denial on process grounds, and a fully granted, fully denied, and then partially. the question I have is, have you looked at and would you find to be of interest in looking at the rates at which agencies actually grant, give access to records or withhold records or partially withhold records? Because the statistics here, at first blush, fully granted, you could make the conclusion 2008 goes from 41% down to 21%. That's bad, but if it looks bad, but if it turned out to be that of those 21%, more records were actually being released than in the 41%, then that's a different story. So have you looked at that separate question?
No, we have not. Again, it's a matter of data available, and it's what we can include in this specific paper. But you're right about that comment.
Those data just aren't on FOIA.gov.
I'm sorry, you said that they're not.
They're not.
They're not. So that raises an interesting question for me as to whether there's the capability of gathering those statistics, and I don't know whether DOJ does in FOIA reports in terms of percentage of requests actually, provided, records partially provided or all withheld. Seems to me that that's a question that we should explore.
Okay. Lee was next.
Lee Stephen, just a couple comments. I wanted to reiterate what both Emily and Bradley said about looking at aggregate versus individual cases, and the importance of reviewing that information. Bradley mentioned that he was, he looked at the number of requests per FOIA officer and thought the number, 188 was actually pretty good. I have the same comment on your slide in terms of average processing times in days. Simple requests being processed in just over 20 days, certainly under a month, and complex requests anywhere from 3 to 4 months. I can tell you from the requester side, if I had all of my requests answered in 4 months, I would be thrilled. So clearly, and I do know this from personal experience, some agencies are very quick and they do respond, if not exactly within 20 days. For us, that's clearly unrealistic, although the statute says it. Nevertheless, they do respond quickly, relatively speaking, but other agencies, we know going in that it will, if we get any type of response in a couple of years, that's a good thing. So I think it's really important to look at agency on an individual basis for that, as well as the number of requests per officer. The other question or comment I wanted to make was about how you assess costs. I know it's a complicated thing, but when you look at litigation costs in particular, the cost actually may be higher than I don't know exactly how you're calculating that, but the cost could both be higher or lower for two reasons. One is that the actual people the actual lawyers doing the litigation are often DOJ lawyers or U.S. attorneys, not individuals from the agency. And so that's perhaps an added cost that you need to calculate or assess when you're looking at that. But on the other hand, there is the potential for at least a wash, because the time that the FOIA officers who are participating with the DOJ lawyers, for instance, in processing their requests subject to a litigation, they would be doing that same amount of work if they were not in litigation. And the question is, that's a complicated question. I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm just saying that's another factor or variable that you should try to assess when addressing costs, because the amount of work that the agency does is not necessarily any more than they would otherwise do. But then there's also this added cost of the lawyers who are from outside the agency. Thanks.
Both of those are really great points. There's tremendous variation in processing time within agencies. And we see when we start looking at individual agencies, some agencies' processing times have gone down, others have gone up. And we would really like to know why that is. Is that a function of the nature of requests that they're receiving? Is that a function of the number of staff they have versus the total number of requests that are going on? And we don't know. We need to do some more in-depth work around that. And your point about litigation costs, we think is spot on. We're again just reporting the data that were available on FOIA.gov. I don't want to keep saying that. I feel a little bit bad doing that, but really it's the first time that we know of where somebody has looked at these trends at an aggregate level. And more nuanced data around a lot of these pieces, whether it's costs, processing time, staff, would be fantastic to have. And we would love to hear from you if you have suggestions or ideas about how to collect that data. That would be really helpful to us. So we would love your suggestions, not just on where to go for additional directions for additional research, but on how to collect the data that would allow us to do that research. Would be very helpful.
James Stoker, Trinity Washington University. I had a comment and a question. The comment is this, as an individual requester, I'm actually very grateful that the fees don't end up covering the cost of Freedom of Information Act requests, because if they had to, it would make it very difficult for me and many other academics, and I think many other members of the public, to get access to government information. So that is at least a good thing from my perspective, and I know you're not trying to be normative, but I hope that at some point in time, if there hasn't been already, there is some research into the positive benefits of that essential subsidy. My question is this: it concerns your, I guess, the focus of your future work. You had mentioned that you were trying to figure out whether to look at an agency or try to look at individual departments within agencies. And what I was wondering is whether the real differences will be between different administrative units, or be based more on the type of requests, like, for instance, simple versus complex requests. I could imagine simple requests across agencies having a lot more in common in the way that they're processed, like, for instance, how DHS would look at immigration records, or the Veterans Administration might deal with access to veterans' health records. Those could be fairly similar in the way that they're processed, fairly straightforward, whereas the complex requests for information on a subject that requires searching through multiple groups of records, those would seem to have, at least to me, to have more potential to be different. So I wonder if maybe I don't know how you would conceptualize that sort of unit of analysis, I guess, type of request, but that would seem to me to maybe be a fruitful line of inquiry for future research. So thanks.
It's a great suggestion.
But again, it's going to require data, and probably the hardest data that we will be, the hardest data that or the data that is hardest to get is going to be the nature of the request, because we need to really, that would be our unit of analysis, which is hard.
So in that corner over there are folks vying, and Suzanne, I think, was next.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So,
You've got the microphone. Okay.
so you're so polite, thank you.
Ryan Law from Treasury. Just briefly, just to emphasize a couple points people made around the types of requests. And so looking at the chart of the 10 most frequently requested agencies, it occurs to me, and I think this is a point Tom made earlier, that these agencies are, the majority of requests they receive are from individuals for their records, right?
Well, we actually don't know that.
Yeah.
We know that the type of work that the agency does, but not the type of requests that they're getting. It would seem there's a correlation.
So I would, what I suggest is you mentioned a data source was missing to this piece, and I know a lot of agencies post online their FOIA logs, lists of requests that have been made to the agency. It's not a requirement under the statute, but many agencies do that proactively, including, I believe, DHS and Treasury does as well. I think it would, I think it would require a student or an intern to sit in front of a computer for a very long time to categorize each request and bucket them. But that data does exist for many agencies, and I think it would be worth diving into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic suggestion, FOIA logs. We have the students.
Just need the funding, yes.
Suzanne Piotrowski. Hi, guys. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Just a few points for the future research. I can either look at you or talk into the mic, so I'm going to talk into the mic, apparently, so I don't get yelled at. Just To piggyback on what a lot of people were saying about the nature of the work and the type of requester, nobody's mentioned commercial requesters yet, but they obviously play a large role here that you need to think about. If you are going to go forward with the data as opposed to going back, I think we need to think about that your data starts right about when OGIS starts. So there may have been, well, let's hope, OGIS has had some impact, I don't know how, but on the nature of FOIA processing. So something to think about. And then maybe to dig a little more into the data, the folks at the table might be able to tell you some more, but my understanding is the FOIA reports are all self-reported by the agencies, right? And there's a lot of variation there into how those numbers are developed, and so there might be some serious reliability and validity issues that you would want to look into.
Great points.
Okay, Michael's next, and then Joan.
Great.
Hi. Michael Morrissey. Wonderful presentation again. One of the things that kind of listening to this that I think that is, I didn't appreciate until kind of getting to chat and talk with a lot of different FOIA offices is sort of how apples to oranges so many requests are. And even if you have the pages released, it's still very apples to oranges. If somebody's asking for, I want a copy of all the press clippings you've collected, that's going to be a lot less work than I want redacted copies of all internal reviews of some kind of malfeasance or something that requires much more intensive work. So I think one thing that could be really interesting to look at is also sort of points where the FOIA offices, how they're impacted by the rest of an agency's operations. I think FOIA offices are often kind of handed, they're not given a whole lot of control over sort of the material they're handed or given a whole lot of say in sort of how records are managed throughout the rest of the agency. And so if an agency has really good records management, really good record searchability, the FOIA office benefits from that. And if the agency has really poor records management, the FOIA office has to kind of clean up that mess and hope for the best. And so I think figuring out ways that we can sort of look at how that impact could be a very fruitful area to kind of research and also sort of base other public policy. So we're getting a fuller picture, because I think FOIA offices a lot of times bear the brunt of the blame for stuff that's out of their control, you know, even when they're doing really good work, even when they are well managed. Sometimes there's a lot that's out of their control. And one thing that kind of occurred to me was, I think looking at the FOIA logs, as Ryan suggested, is a really great suggestion. And I think there's a lot of material that's out there. But I think also trying to look for sort of natural experiments, sort of two agencies are on the same data system, one upgraded data systems, looking at requests that would touch that data system at one agency and not another, or other kinds of natural experiments where you're looking at a subset of requests that might give us a greater view of sort of how do things that are outside that FOIA office control, whether management or whether technology, can pay off in investments.
Fantastic. Great suggestions. Thank you.
Joan Kaminer, EPA, too tall for me. I just want to reemphasize something that Bradley said that I think really touches on a lot of the points that people are making. But going back to the page count, but for EPA more the document count, when you're addressing, I think the cost, defining how many requests are processed by individual FTEs, I mean, all the way through litigation cost, as well as the differentiation between simple and complex request. It really plays a huge part in the explanation of an agency's processing time when you're able to look at the number of hits or the number of records that are being processed, because you might have a request that ends up with 100 or so records provided, but an agency is processing 50,000 records. And maybe this is more of a point for the committee and what we can do through our recommendations, but I think this is a really essential number to get across in explaining the time and the resources an agency is expending. And then particularly on litigation costs, because it's what I'm involved mostly on, you might, I'm not sure how the FTE are defined exactly in the reports, but not only do you have with some of the larger agencies or even mid-sized agencies like EPA, a large number of attorneys who are working solely on FOIA litigation. That's the entirety of their jobs. But you're also utilizing the FTEs that process initial FOIA requests. And with increases in litigation that we're seeing, you're seeing this FTE number that an agency has resources for being expended for a larger percentage towards appeals and litigations. And I don't think that that's separated out enough in the information that you have. And I would love to be able to get that for you, but I don't have it either. So just more stuff that you guys need, which would really, I think, enhance your research, but might be something we can suggest through the committee for agencies to collect.
Yeah, that's a great point. More nuanced data and being able to separate things out. The aggregate stuff is fantastic, but the more nuanced, I think, helps inform the research more and helps inform the practice of FOIA.
And we understand that all of these are really great suggestions, and the data that will help us understand what is going on might be different kinds of data. It might be aggregate data, it might be experiment, it might be case studies, interviews, to really talk to the staff who are doing that kind of work. And that would allow us, or give us a more comprehensive picture, which then would allow us to make certain clearer judgments and observations. With your help.
Yeah, Tom Sussman again. Those are great discussions. Would you put together a recommendation of the data? I mean, every time the FOIA is amended, they often add in data sets to be reported. Mm-hmm. And it's done by congressional staff, egged on by who knows who. And I was on the staff when the first data requirement was put into effect in 1974. And it seems to me that the insights that can be gained from the kind of analysis that you're doing of data is extremely important, very useful. And if we could know more about, do you want data on a unit basis? Are some agencies not reporting it? Are the agency reports adequately translated into FOIA.gov? I mean, there are all sorts of questions that a number of people have raised. It seems to me that you're in a great position to pull together for us, and we might well consider that as a addendum recommendation that would go to agencies and the Congress.
We'd be delighted to, and if we can talk afterwards, Alina
Love to.
And others, about what the best format for making that available to you is.
Sure.
But yeah, we'd be delighted to help with that.
Is that okay with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful idea.
I ask after.
I know, Suzanne, I'm sorry.
Hi, Suzanne Piotrowski, following up from Tom, and maybe Alina can answer this too, but it's not just what data, but really defining how what that data is, how it's going to be collected. So it's collected consistently across the agencies, and I don't know if that's already done, not that I know of, maybe it is, but that's something I think we would have to work on to make sure that we then can make the comparisons. Or Tina, if you want to do that.
It's a great point, yeah.
Anyone else have any other thoughts, questions? Did we answer some of the questions, Khaldun and Tina, that you came with for the committee?
Yes, and you asked us more questions.
Good.
It
all worked out.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much
Thank you.
for having us
Thank
here.
you
We really
very much.
appreciate it.
Yep, we really appreciate it. Thank you. So we're going to take a 15-minute break. Please come back at 11:32, if that's at all possible. We'll see you back in 15 minutes. Remember, the mics are still on live, so watch your side conversations.
I don't know if you remember.
full resource as possible.
I look forward to it. So she won't be writing up an article for a while. Like if I go onto your website, is it?
Yeah, I'll send you a copy of the announcement.
Oh, cool.
And I think
Okay.
she's going to be, they're trying to do every other week or so. Some follow-ups in terms of what's going on.
What a great idea. You know, among my other friends in other agencies who are
Yeah. Oh, that's so fun. Yeah. No, it just got started. We started a little bit late because we did a lot of stuff for Sunshine Week this year. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yes, 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 always. Yes, we've said that before. Kirsten and I are very open to that.
So to your point earlier about the requests and timing, I'd really love to
You can see this on the record.
question like, how do we establish those requests from individuals, records about themselves, through FOIA?
I think that's a really important point, because that's a major distinction in the whole process.
Yeah. And so what happens is agencies spend, I mean, if 90% of the requests they get so we'll see individuals, right? They spend the majority of the resources toward those requests.
Okay. So I hate to break up the party, everyone, but we're going to get back to our business. And I need Suzanne and Mike will back up here. Sorry.
Well, and Bradley.
Yep.
And Emily.
And does anyone know where Bradley is? Emily? No, I know you're here. We're missing Tom, Bradley, and Emily. This corner over here. Tom ran for coffee. Oh, that might be a little while. All right, we might have to start without him. Okay. Sarah and Abby, do we have you on the phone? Okay, just wanted to make sure you're sticking with us. Okay, so I really do want to try to stick to our schedule as much as possible. We have next a presentation that is going to be presented by our Deputy Director, OJIS Deputy Director Martha Murphy. We decided that it would be odd for Kirsten or I to give this presentation since we're sitting up here in a different role. Just a little background, this presentation grew out of a request from the Vision Subcommittee, co-chaired by Joan Kaminer and Chris Knox. And as you may recall, the Vision Subcommittee wrote a mission statement which includes reconsidering the model of the Office of Government Information Services within the FOIA community. We subsequently learned that other committee members were interested in this presentation, so rather than doing it twice, we thought we'd do it all at once for the entire committee. Again, copies of Martha's PowerPoint presentation is in your packet, and we will also post it on our website. Also in your packet is a handout from our Sunshine Week event that we hosted here last week. And before Martha gets started, I just want to take this quick opportunity to express my gratitude to Tom Sussman and to Jason Barron, who each did an outstanding job of shepherding and moderating two very successful panels during our Sunshine Week event. OJIS and NARA are very grateful for your time and your participation. I've also decided after Tom's observations last week, I will be ordering t-shirts with the logo OJIS Groupie. So I'll be taking orders at the end if anyone wants to get in on this. Pages 8 through 10 of the handout from our Sunshine Week event is a one-page summary of OJIS's 2019 annual report on fiscal year 2018, which is now available on our website at no extra charge, and a two-page list of highlights of OJIS, which this year we celebrate our 10 years as the FOIA Ombudsman. So with that, I'm now going to turn over the mic to Martha.
Okie doke. So I'm going to start off this presentation by giving you some background about the creation of our office and our mission. I'm going to explain how we help agencies and requesters to settle disputes through our dispute resolution program. And I'm also going to discuss our compliance role and several other efforts undertaken by OJIS to support our overall mission of improving the FOIA process. Whoops, going the wrong way? Nope, I'm going the right way. So, while the concept of dispute resolution as a way to improve customer service and the FOIA process has been around for a number of years, Congress embraced dispute resolution in the Open Government Act of 2007. Through the passage of this act, OJIS was created by Congress, and at the time of the passage and since, Congress has referred to OJIS as the FOIA Ombudsman. Congress gave us two very clear missions. We're charged with providing mediation services to help resolve disputes between requesters and federal agencies. And we also have responsibility for reviewing agencies' FOIA policies and procedures and compliance, and identifying procedures and methods for improving FOIA compliance. As the FOIA Ombudsman, we play an important role in educating the public about FOIA. We help to train FOIA professionals to resolve disputes, and through our compliance program, we help agencies to improve their FOIA processes, which ultimately helps to resolve FOIA disputes as well. We also educate our customers through our use of advisory opinions and the FOIA Ombuds Observer. So most often we act as a facilitator to help agencies and requesters better understand the issues and each other's parties' positions. But we formally opened our doors in 2009 with the staff of two, OGIS's first director, Miriam Nisbet, and an administrative assistant. And Miriam was surprised to see that requests for mediation were already waiting for her on her desk. So the office prioritized setting up mediation or dispute resolution program as our first step. The first thing to know about our dispute resolution program is that we do not dictate solutions or tell agencies that they have to turn over records. Our mediation services are completely voluntary and as such are dependent on both agencies and requesters to agree to participate. Although generally most of our mediation is instigated by the requesters, agencies also will often come to us with issues that they have. The statute specifically says our mediation services are non-exclusive alternative to litigation, and we try to prevent litigation by explaining the FOIA process, how the search is conducted, or an explanation of the records withheld under certain exemptions and that type of information. There's nothing in the statute that prevents a requester from filing a suit after going through our process, but a lot of times the explanations we provide let the requester to better understand the agency's response. So we look to we look to agencies to help us to provide that kind of detailed explanation when a request comes in. We have seen a number of times where requesters are telling us that they now understand why the information was withheld, even if they're not happy about the fact. And generally, once a case is in litigation, we do not get involved. At that point, we have to step aside. So, of course, I also should explain to you, in addition to what we do, what we do not do. We cannot tell agencies they must release documents. We cannot tell agencies how to process a request or act as the FOIA police. We do not issue tickets. A lot of people would like us to, but we do not issue tickets. We don't process requests or review appeals, so we often have to inform requesters that we actually don't have access to the records that they're interested in. We don't help with issues outside the realm of FOIA. This happens quite often that requesters will conflate the FOIA request they have with sort of the motivation for the FOIA request they have. And we don't dictate a resolution to a dispute. We help the parties to come to a resolution themselves. Despite these limitations, requesters ask for our help because our process works in a variety of instances. Not all of the issues we deal with are complex. One of our most important functions is, as a FOIA Ombudsman, to educate people about the FOIA and the FOIA process. Many of our simple cases call on us to address misunderstandings between requesters and agencies, or to educate requesters about the way the FOIA process is intended to work. And often, we give requesters status information. We try to give them additional information about the agency's workload and backlog. I will not say that providing them with this information makes the requester any happier about the delay, but we have had requesters say that it helps them to understand why the agency has not responded within the 20 working days. Fairly often, requesters just want to know that their request is not in a black hole and that they're being treated fairly. At OGIS, we handle both simple and complex cases. The simple cases generally fall into our role as an educator or a FOIA ombudsman. For example, we often provide requesters with more information about what a FOIA exemption means. And we also help requesters to obtain information about the status of their requests, as I said. For more complex issues, our reputation as a neutral party with subject matter expertise helps us to work with the parties to identify the issues and develop solutions. The reason that people file FOIA litigation are complex and diverse, and we do not have any way to track how many lawsuits have been prevented by our mediation program. We do know that there are requesters who have changed their minds about filing a lawsuit after going through our process, just anecdotally. We also know of cases where parties have been able to settle parts of the dispute, which then narrows the issues for litigation, saving the court from having to deal with some of those issues. We have also helped to mediate discussions about the use of discretionary exemptions and helped agencies coordinate their responses to a requester who files multiple similar requests across the government. So in short, OGIS works. So now you have a little bit of background about our approach to dispute resolution. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of what we do when someone asks us for assistance. So first, I want to note that both requesters and agencies, again, can ask us for assistance. Although most of our cases are brought by requesters, agencies have also approached us for assistance. The first step in our process is to reach out to both parties involved in the dispute. Generally, our point of contact at the agency is the FOIA public liaison. One important thing to note is that mediation services are confidential. We do not share anything that one of the parties tells us without permission to do so. And once we have all of the information we need about the case, we can begin to identify the problem areas and work with the parties to identify possible solutions. When we close our complex cases, we write closing correspondence that's sent to both the agency and the requester. And this letter explains the facts of the case and the resolution that was reached. So now we've talked a little bit about how the process works. I'd like to talk a little bit about how recent changes to the law have impacted our operations. The FOIA Improvement Act of 2016 made several changes relevant to OGIS. Just a moment ago, I described our role as non-exclusive alternative to litigation. In light of this description, OGIS was originally thought of as belonging at a very particular place in the FOIA process, after the requester had gone through the agency's administrative appeal process, but before they had filed a lawsuit. In fact, OIP issued guidance soon after we opened our doors, directing agencies to include a description of our services in their responses to administrative appeals. The FOIA Improvement Act turned this concept of where we belong in the FOIA process on its head by directing agencies to inform requesters of our services much earlier in the FOIA process. Specifically, when the agency makes an adverse determination to an initial request and when an agency cites unusual circumstances and will need more than the 10 days provided in the statute in addition to the 20 to respond to the request. Initially, we found that this change created a good deal of confusion both among requesters and the agencies, and we received a great deal of communication that was intended for a different party. We still will have requesters send appeals to us directly sometimes and things like that. So that's sort of an ongoing challenge that we have. We explored this issue during the Chief FOIA Officers Council meeting earlier this year. And in case you're not familiar with the Chief FOIA Officers Council, the body was created by the FOIA Improvement Act of 2016, and it's co-chaired by OGIS and OIP. During that meeting, we discussed updated language that we recommended agencies to use to meet these new notification requirements and to clear up confusion. But the largest effect the FOIA Improvement Act of 2016 had was to drastically increase the number of requests for dispute resolution services that were received by OGIS. Between the first quarter of 2016 and the fourth quarter of 2018, requests for our assistance increased pretty dramatically. Quarter 3 of fiscal year 2018 was our busiest ever. And as you can see, we experienced a significant increase in requests for assistance immediately following the passage of the Improvement Act in 2016. And that is due, as I mentioned earlier, in large part to the fact that Congress affirmatively increased OGIS's role during the FOIA administrative process. Requesters are now able to come to us at any point in their FOIA journey. We closed 4,681 requests for assistance in fiscal year 2018, about 11% more than the 4,199 requests completed in fiscal year 2017. And we ended fiscal year 2018 with 308 requests for assistance that had been pending more than 90 days. And that's more than double the 149 requests that had been pending more than 90 days at the end of fiscal year 2017. So we continue to explore ways to meet the demand of our growing case log, and we've added several efficiencies to OGIS mediation process that have helped to address the demand for our services. However, we've also seen an advantage to this increased volume and for being involved earlier in the FOIA process. We now have more data to help us to determine where the FOIA process could be improved, and that informs our compliance program. In fact, OGIS plays a key role in assessing and identifying procedures to improve compliance with the statute. There is admittedly some overlap between the functions of OGIS and the Office of Information Policy at the Department of Justice. FOIA charges OIP with encouraging agencies' compliance with the law. However, Congress clearly intended a distinct and separate role for OGIS. One of the best indicators of this distinction is Congress's choice to establish OGIS in the National Archives and Records Administration. One of NARA's strategic goals is to make access happen and making this agency a natural home for the FOIA Ombudsman. Also, unlike the Department of Justice, which represents agencies when they're sued under FOIA, our location with NARA allows OGIS the neutrality required to mediate FOIA disputes objectively and assess FOIA compliance. The FOIA Improvement Act of 2016 reaffirmed the critical role that OGIS plays in the FOIA process. Congress increased our independence and further highlighted our neutrality by giving us the ability to share our frank observations and challenges to effective FOIA implementation directly with Congress and the President. In 2015, OGIS launched its formal compliance program that assesses agency compliance with the FOIA and identifies issues common to many agencies. And we now have a fairly robust agency assessment methodology. Our assessment reports, which are all on our website, include a thorough review of the agency's management and communication practices, their uses of technology, and recommendations for improvement. The process is voluntary. Agencies come to us to request our assistance in a compliance assessment. We follow up with the agency 120 days after the report is issued to see what steps they've taken to address our recommendations. So far, we've reviewed FOIA programs at the National Archives, and that was actually my FOIA program when I was at the National Archives that was reviewed. DHS, FOIA Privacy Office, U.S. Coast Guard, Customs and Border Protection, Federal Emergency Management Agency, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Transportation Security Administration, U.S. Secret Service, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and U.S. Postal Service. And we are currently wrapping up the Department of Education right now. At this rate, it's going to take us about 25 years to get through every agency. While we know there's no one-size-fits-all solution for managing a FOIA program, we work with the knowledge that effective programs generally do three things well. They manage their resources effectively, they make smart investments in technology, and they communicate, they communicate effectively with requesters. At this point, the FOIA programs we have reviewed have addressed over 97% of our recommendations. In addition to the agency compliance evaluations, we've also conducted issue assessments regarding government-wide FOIA issues. To date, we have completed two, one regarding still interested letters and one regarding agency compliance with required dispute resolution notices. In an effort to assess FOIA programs government-wide, we've included FOIA questions through the annual Records Management Self-Assessment, also known as the RMSA. The RMSA allows us to connect with virtually every agency subject to FOIA through a partnership with our NARA colleagues in the Office of the Chief Records Officer. Federal agencies are required to conduct the self-assessment and submit their findings to NARA, and the goal is to determine whether federal agencies comply with the statutory and regulatory records management requirements. The 2016 and 2017 RMSAs included several questions pertaining to FOIA. For 2 consecutive years, we've issued summaries of the answers we received from agencies, and we've posted those on our website. The RMSA has been a really valuable tool that helps OGIS expand review of agency FOIA policies and procedures, identify potential compliance issues that merit further exploration, and set OGIS's goals and priorities. The self-assessment survey process also encourages coordination and collaboration between FOIA officers and agency records officers. There was initially some pushback when the records officer says, well, we don't know the answers to these questions. And I think it was a nice thing to say, well, go talk to your FOIA staff, because that is a communication that it benefits everyone. Another way that OGIS fulfills its mandate to review FOIA policies, procedures, and compliance and identify methods for improving FOIA compliance is by reviewing proposed amendments to agencies' FOIA regulations, which we've been doing since 2010. In the last 2 fiscal years, OGIS has reviewed updated FOIA regulations from 64 departments and agencies. In addition to our dispute resolution and compliance programs, we also work to give agency FOIA professionals the skills they can use to prevent a dispute from occurring in the first place. We offer a day-long dispute resolution training skills session several times a year, every fiscal year. The purpose of the course is not to make attendees trained mediators, but to give the FOIA professionals practical skills they can use to improve their communication with requesters. During the training session, we also give attendees a chance to try out the skills during role-playing sessions. We've also received a fair number of requests for agency-specific training. For example, this fiscal year, we'll have at least 5 agency-specific training sessions. But our education and outreach doesn't end with dispute resolution training. One of several initiatives we continue to work on is to develop some additional information and background materials for our customers. For example, we've developed an infographic that helps requesters to make better decisions about whether they should open a case with us or seek assistance from the agency's FOIA Public Liaison. FOIA Public Liaisons are individuals designated by Chief FOIA officers who requesters can contact to raise concerns about the service received from the FOIA Requester Service Center. Especially early in the process, agency FOIA Public Liaisons are in a much better position to help the requester. For example, the agency FOIA Public Liaison is going to have a better understanding of the type of files the agency holds and their search capabilities. The agency FOIA Public Liaison can use that knowledge to help a requester to narrow a request or formulate it in a way that's less burdensome for the agency, which could speed the process. We are always happy to facilitate those discussions, though, and we have found that our stepping in to facilitate can be of particular assistance if communication has broken down between the agency and the requester. The infographic that we discussed earlier is available on our website if anyone is interested in that. This past year, we also rolled out our FOIA Ombuds Observer. As the FOIA Ombudsman, we are uniquely situated to observe and examine the interactions between requesters and agencies across the federal government. And we note common questions for issues that arise in the FOIA process. The FOIA Ombuds Observer addresses questions and issues that are frequently seen in the individual cases that we receive. And our goal is to provide information to our customers and increase efficiency and transparency in the FOIA process. Our first advisory opinion was released last year regarding agency communication with requesters. And just a word on advisory opinions. Prior to the passing of the FOIA Improvement Act, OGIS could only issue advisory opinions for individual disputes if mediation had not resolved the dispute. For several years, OGIS struggled with how to reconcile its authority to issue advisory opinions with its ability to be an impartial, neutral party that can facilitate a resolution of disputes between requesters and agencies. We're grateful that Congress recognized this tension and with the FOIA Improvement Act gave OGIS the power to issue advisory opinions at its discretion. OGIS intends to utilize this now modified advisory opinion power to issue opinions that address the most common disputes, complaints, and trends that we uncover through our dispute resolution practice and that are most likely to lead to litigation. Our plan is to build a body of advisory opinions available online for both requesters and agencies to consult that will help to head off disputes before they fester and lead to that litigation. As the FOIA Ombudsman, we believe engagement is a critical component of our work, and our office plays an active role in educating the public about the FOIA process. We work directly with FOIA requesters and federal agencies. We listen to concerns and facilitate better understanding of all points of view. We've hosted the National Archives Sunshine Week event for several years and a forum on access and immigration records last summer and have an active blog and Twitter feed. OGIS also provides leadership to two bodies that allow us to address challenges to the implementation of FOIA and improve its administration, this committee, and the Chief FOIA Officers Council. We also host an annual open meeting, and we publish an annual report. Our fiscal year 2018 annual report is now available on our website. In our annual report to Congress and the President, we discuss trends in our findings. In our annual report this year, we made a legislative recommendation stemming from one of 7 recommendations made by the second term of the FOIA Advisory Committee, the previous FOIA Advisory Committee. Our interactions with such a wide range of agencies and requesters through our dispute resolution and compliance programs, combined with our leadership of the Chief FOIA Officers Council and the FOIA Advisory Committee, make us well suited to identify major challenges in implementation in the FOIA, of the FOIA in the United States. So that was a lot of information, and I'm sorry to throw it all at you so quickly. Does anyone have any questions?
This is Lee Stephen. Thank you for that presentation. It is helpful, and I can just attest from the requester's perspective that our interactions with OGIS in the dispute resolution has been very positive. I was pleasantly surprised at how responsive the agency was in facilitating the help. But furthering this theme of gathering the proper kinds of data, or the kinds of data that would help improve the FOIA process going forward and kind of get down to a more granular level. I'm wondering, in addition to the aggregate information that you've provided, how detailed you're tracking the dispute resolution process in terms of results, and to explain and give a more particular concrete example that I'm thinking about. The very first time that we engaged OGIS, it was a great experience up until the closing letter, which was a good result. Both the agency and my organization engaged in that mediation process, and we reached a resolution, and then the agency ignored what they had promised, or whether it's a legally binding promise or not. They did reach a settlement in that mediation process, and then ignored it. And so we ultimately sued in that particular case. And of course that left the whole dispute resolution process in my mind to be left me feeling like, how useless is this? It was a great experience going through it, but at the end result, it was just it ended up being a 6-month delay in the whole process, because the agency, although they participated, they ignored the final result. So that's one example. I'm not necessarily saying that that's the only example, and maybe that's the only time that's ever happened. I kind of doubt it, but it might be. So maybe it's not that big of a problem. But the idea here is to say, are there ways to track and to gather the data on a little more granular level those types of results? And if so, I would encourage that in your reporting, because I think that would also help the analysis of how to improve the FOIA process altogether.
This is Elaine Asimo. I'm just curious, did you come back to OGIS to let them know that, this was probably before my time, to let them know that the agency was not complying?
No, we didn't. We just went ahead and sued, because the closing letter says that's all we can do. OGIS is done, and we acknowledge that. And so we didn't even think about that, actually. But
I would encourage that for next time.
I will definitely.
I mean, there's not much we can do if we don't know that there's a lack of compliance. So.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to sit here and think in my own mind. We don't really right now gather data on what happens after we walk out of the process. We are increasingly gathering data on the category of requests that are coming in, because one way that we're trying to streamline is we're creating some templates for those situations where we feel that simply giving more information about the FOIA exemption can help to clarify the response that you got from the requester. And so we are tracking in our data those templates, so we have a better sense of the type of information that's coming in
but we don't right now really track too much the end result, and I'd have to think about how we would do that. It's a good idea.
Yeah, on that point, I agree that it would be good practice for the requester to follow up with OGIS. But the other way that this could be tracked, at least a little bit, at least potentially, is for OGIS to say, okay, after 3 months or after a certain period of time, anyways, when after a closing letter, in which there is some result that the agency is going to have to do, as agreed. You would categorize the results in that way. 3 months later, you could send a letter or make a contact, say, well, could you give us an update on how this turned out? That would be at least another data point.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Tom Sussman. First an observation and then a question. The observation is the subject of OIP comes up, and you mentioned overlap to some extent. And it might be interesting to the group to understand some of the history of that, because OIP was given its authority through the amendments that I drafted in '74. And at that time, the Justice Department had a separate office. It was actually first in the Office of Legal Counsel and then Office of Legal Policy that was giving FOIA advice to agencies, completely separate from both the Justice Department administration of the FOIA and litigation. And when OIP was created and merged those various functions, the neutrality of what we saw in justice, in the justice advice giving function, and justice was very good. This was the years of Bob Salishan, for those of you who are 100 years old, was very independent. And those were the years when the Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, came in with amendments to strengthen the Freedom of Information Act. And so, of course, OIP's role hasn't been changed since then, but clearly it's morphed into an adversarial and advocacy function. And I've had personal experience begging them to do ombudsman work before OGIS was created, and they really demurred on that, even though they call them so. I wish Melanie was here. She and I have had this conversation, so this won't come as any news to her when she reads the transcript. The question is, first remind me what your legislative request was, and then I want you to add to that your second two wishes in terms of I'm now running Congress and your wish is my command. You get 3 wishes to improve OGIS. What are they?
Alina? I'm going to defer to my director on that one.
So this is Alina Asimo. Martha was going to cover a little bit later, and I know you have to leave, Tom, a little bit early, but we passed on the recommendation about addressing a legislative fix to the dilemma and intersection of Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act and posting that agencies are required to do either in response to 3 or more requests or even proactive disclosures. And we provided 3 suggestions for folks to think about, but the idea was we just wanted to start the dialogue, and that's what we were tasked to do, and that's what we wanted to do. We have gone up to meet with committee staffers and have started that dialogue, but it's all in our annual report. We put it in there. So my wish list, can I get back to you?
Yeah, that's fine. I want you to think about it, because obviously that's relevant. Tom Sussman talking still. That's relevant to what we're trying to analyze, and we have, you should play a major role in prodding our thinking, provoking us to new heights.
Okay. Emily and then Joan. Sorry.
Emily Creighton, I just wanted to make a much smaller point, which was, and I'm not sure if you already are collecting this data, just to what extent the requests from requesters for OGIS assistance has to do with just no response from an agency.
Yes,
we
are
I think
collecting that data.
That's important.
Thank you. Joan, and then I'll come back to you guys.
Joan Kaminer, EPA. I'm going to be a broken record, I think, through a lot of these meetings on voluminous request and volume of records that agencies are dealing with. But to what extent are OGIS staff either trained or have expertise in the search syntax development or negotiation on the developing of parameters for searches? What I find that a lot of the the issues that could be resolved with FOIA requests before they go into litigation really center around the development of the search itself. And
Sure.
having someone mediate that negotiation, which we now do in litigation, would be incredibly helpful.
So we have noticed, and one thing that I think we've talked about a lot is that the capability of the search with any agency is going to depend on the technology that they have. And so there is no one answer to that. So I think we really depend on communication with the FOIA liaisons because they hold that expertise. And if what we can do is open that dialogue between the requesters and the liaison, then that's probably our most appropriate role because there's no way we can know what those parameters are. Now, if agencies would like to publish more information about, hey, here's a good search for us given, for instance, our email search capability or that type of thing. I think that could be really helpful because the more information we have, we're happy to convey that directly to requesters. But I know from my experience, on the FOIA side, being running a FOIA office, and then from the experience we've had working with different agencies, that there is no standard for that search. And that we're going to talk a little bit about the recommendations and where we are with that. One of them is to have a change to the FAR, which is the requirements for acquisition, that will sort of demand that FOIA capability be part of any acquired new technology. Ideally, that would lead to some sort of standardization there, which would help us out. But I really think that the liaisons play a really important part. And the agencies that we work with that have a very engaged liaison who is given the time to do their job really pays dividends.
Over here, Suzanne.
Hi, Martha. Suzanne Piotrowski. Could you tell us some more about the advisory opinions? Just
again,
about that whole
I'm going to go back to
process, or-
Alina on
Okay.
the advisory opinion issue. I'm sorry.
It's been several months, so I hope I can remember. Maybe Sheila will also help me. But we decided, again, based on trends that we were seeing, that we really needed to address the issue of what agencies are putting in their letters. So content, very important about spelling out in a very clear manner who a requester can contact at any point in the process. That was something that we actually addressed at the Chief FOIA Officer Council meeting last year as well. What we were seeing a lot was a lot of, this is my term, a lot of mushed letters. And what was happening was that a lot of agencies were dropping their contact information. And the only contact information the requester was getting was ours. And that became a significant issue. Part of the reason why we had such a huge increase in our workload right after the FOIA Improvement Act. And so there was no contact for the agency. And so the requester didn't know what to do. They would call us, and of course we're going to help them. But that was really a very important procedural aspect of trying to address that and improving that part of the process. And we have seen an improvement, and we're continuing to keep an eye on it. I wouldn't say it's perfect. We're still getting mushed letters sometimes. When we do see them, we call it out to each other. We run to Kirsten. Kirsten is our compliance team lead. She is a team of one right now. She needs help. And we are keeping an eye on it. Sheila, did I cover that correctly? Oh, thank God. It's been a little while. We did get some feedback initially that we forgot to number our FOIA advisory opinion that we issued, so we're going to number it when we issue our next one.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Suzanne Piotrowski again. So if I'm clear, there's been one advisory opinion?
Correct.
Okay. And then the plan is another one will come out as needed?
Yeah, I mean,
Mike.
You have a mic.
Yes, the plan is we're now reviewing our.
Use the mic.
Sheila, use the mic.
Sorry. Apologize. Yeah, we are now reviewing our caseload and identifying those topics that we think would be best suited for advisory opinions, and the plan is to start issuing them in this summer. So it's not a set schedule, but it's really as we see those issues that we think would be best addressed through advisory opinions.
And I think we would also like, when an opinion comes out, to also perhaps have a FOIA Ombuds Observer, which is something we put up on our website, which is really directed towards requesters, because I think with a lot of these issues, there's advice basically for the agency, and then there's the other side of it is that there's advice for the requester. So we're going to look to make it a sort of a comprehensive whole.
Yeah, I
using
mean-
both, all the tools that we have to try to get the information out.
Martha does make a good point. It's really, our view of it is, we have this opinion, but we want to show what that opinion is based on. So we have like a compliance report that would go with it. We'd have advice that goes out to the requester. So it's not just, putting an opinion out there. It's really, we want to be able to put an opinion, but actually show you what has given rise to that opinion, why we are issuing it, what advice we can give to as many people as we can. So it's a really comprehensive approach that we're trying to take to these things.
Elaine Asimo, the first FOIA Ombuds Observer that we put out, actually we tied to our immigration forum last year, because we really have a lot of requesters that come to us who are just plain confused about what agency they need to go to in order to get a particular kind of record. And we really thought that was an important need to address. We tried to really spell out, if you want this kind of record, you go to ICE. If you want that kind of record, you go to CBP. And hopefully it's helping folks. I don't think we're keeping data on whether it's been super effective and we're getting less requests because of that, but we really wanted to make sure that we were addressing a need that we were seeing among the requests for help that we were getting in.
I know we're running short on time. Emily Creighton, I just want to address that what you just mentioned, Alina, that was a really, really informative forum. I can't say that the immigration agencies have ever all sat together and explained how the FOIA process works in a way that was so comprehensive. I think to Joan's point, though, something similar to that, where requesters heard how those agencies actually process requests, how they use search terms, how they look for records, how they keep records, would be extraordinarily helpful. I think that through the process of litigation, a select group of people, sort of understand that process and still feel very much in the dark, speaking for myself, in many aspects. So I think that something like that would be extremely helpful, certainly not just for the Department of Homeland Security, but for other agencies as well, I'm sure.
Okay, thanks. Any other comments? I don't want to ignore the folks on the phone. Sarah and Abby. Questions for Martha?
I don't have any. This is Sarah.
Okay, thanks.
I don't have any either. Abby.
Okay, thanks, Abby. Kevin.
Yeah, this is Kevin Goldberg. One thing to think about, I know you only have one now, but hopefully you have a lot of advisory opinions, is to start planning out now how they're going to become easily searchable, probably something along the line of head notes with topic areas. So, because I just picked up look back to see if it was in there, and you have an executive summary, but 5 years, 10 years from now, it's going to be really, you're going to want something along the lines of, delay, record search, records requested, that sort of thing.
So you're volunteering to help us with that?
No, that's great. That's great advice.
Yeah, no, that's good. Martha, thank you.
Okay.
Round of applause for Martha. Okay, we're pretty much still sticking to Sky. I know we're all running a little bit late, so we'll kind of continue to sail along. This is our opportunity to have the subcommittee co-chairs report out. And I don't want to rush anyone, so feel free to take as much time as you need. We have reports from Time Volume, Vision, and Records Management, and I believe that Kirsten deemed it that Emily and Bradley go first. I do want to mention, and I forgot to mention it earlier, that we should applaud Bradley White for receiving the DHS FOIA Officer of the Year Award during Sunshine Week last week. Congratulations. Very well deserved, I'm sure. But on that note, I'm going to turn it over to you guys and tell us what's going on in your subcommittee.
Bradley White, and first off, thank you all very much. That's much appreciated. So when we initially got our subcommittee together, we came up with a group of 7 action items and broke our team up accordingly. After the last meeting, we kind of realized that 4 of those areas really blended together and would lend themselves to a much more concentrated group effort. Emily's going to talk about those. I get the other ones. So the first action item we had was tracking progress on past recommendations, particularly related to the question of resources for FOIA. And Patricia has been looking into that for our team, and she will continue to track and monitor progress. I note that we're going to have a presentation on all of that just after this, so we're absolutely looking forward to that. And and we've been looking into other reports that OGIS has provided for us. The second action item was to analyze complex requests, and we were going to review the annual FOIA reports from the agencies to see if there's any trends we can identify with the number of complex requests reported over time, and then look at the increase, particularly in complex requests. And OGIS was helpful enough to offer help from Carrie, who is, still, am I getting this right? She's on detail from one of the presidential
Johnson
libraries.
Library.
Thank you very much. And I know she's looking into that and beginning that process, and we are absolutely looking forward to that. The most recent update was that it's harder to spot the trends than we thought it was, which honestly isn't too surprising considering how much data there is. So when we do get that, we will be excited to receive it and to go over it. And then
I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is Asimo. I just want to point out that it appears that not all the annual FOIA reports are out yet.
Okay.
There are a few agencies that haven't been cleared by OIB. Luckily, OGIS gets to be in on that act, and so we're keeping track. But obviously, the shutdown affected.
Absolutely.
Contributed to that delay, but hopefully they'll be coming out soon.
Excellent, thank you. And then our third action item is on international research, looking at other countries' models with regard to the time and volume in FOIA requests. And Patricia has joined that group along with Abby, who's running it, and Ginger was on it as well. And we were discussing effective ways to go about conducting that research. We have also identified outside folks who have expertise in that area at schools and at commissions that we can reach out to as well. So we're going to begin that work and hopefully have something good to report.
Emily Creighton, and I also just following up on that, we know that we have committee members as well that have some of that expertise, and so we'll be reaching out to them as well. So the remaining action items that we have, and I should preface the reporting I'll be doing by saying that we understand that some of the action items will be changing, and that the roles of the committee members will be morphing as some of the work is done, which is great news. And I should also say the subcommittee has really stepped up. Everyone has been doing their part and coordinating and working together really well. So I really appreciate all the work that everyone's putting into this. In the next few weeks, we are thinking through how to finalize some of the two surveys that committee members have developed. And these surveys are to be distributed to the requester community and to agencies as well. So we talked about this at our last committee meeting and talked about some of the criteria that we would be considering and coming up with the survey questions. And we're happy to distribute the surveys that we've drafted to the entire committee to take a look. The subcommittee is now looking at them and providing feedback. And just as a reminder, so the agencies that we would reach out to and submit the surveys to and the requesters that we'll be reaching out to should fit some criteria. And so I'll just remind everyone that for the list of agencies, we really wanted to take into consideration those that had large backlogs and those that were able to achieve reductions in those backlogs. And OGIS has stepped in again. Huge kudos to the staff at OGIS. The tiny but mighty staff has been helping us with our work. To conduct research, including data around agencies and backlog data that had to do with sustained success in bringing down backlogs. And so we have some of that data, and we're going to arrive at a final list in the next short while, hopefully, to better understand what agency we should be submitting our surveys to. Kirsten is also helping us review surveys from the committee that have been submitted in the past. And to see what agencies have responded to surveys that have been developed in the past. So sort of along these lines as well, I had a quick conversation with Suzanne today, and we're going to be thinking about methodology and the best way to conduct these surveys so that we'll have the best data and the most reliable data we can in this sort of what I understand to be not having the background here around survey methodology, but just it is sort of an anecdotal, response to a survey, but we hope that it will be instructive nonetheless. So we're similarly developing a list of requesters to be surveyed based on criteria such as how frequently they submit complex requests and how frequently they prevail in litigation, which I understand can, different people can have different opinions about that, and those that request large amounts of data. And Alina and others have been helpful in gathering some information to help inform that list. And the survey for requesters will address how they understand the existing resources for assistance in drafting a request and submitting a request that exist at the agency and elsewhere, best practices for drafting a request, use of search terms, an understanding of the agency's search and processing and production functions, how to search communications like emails versus other types of records, and what is the best practice for disseminating information, what they view to be the best practice for disseminating information from the agencies to requesters. So the surveys have been drafted, and they're far along, and so we're seeking input, as I mentioned, from the entire subcommittee before finalizing. Kirsten is going to investigate and may have news about whether we need sign-off from OGIS on the surveys before they are distributed or disseminated. And we also discussed some of the issues. I believe Ryan raised some issues, some good concerns around the Paperwork Reduction Act and to what extent a survey can be distributed to the requester community from this committee. And we found what we hope is a way forward, which is to work with the Association for Access Professionals and to distribute a survey through that organization, and also we'll be exploring how we can also distribute the survey in other ways, maybe through the other contacts with the requester community. So Claire Stanley and I, who is the executive director at ASAP, had a conversation, and she's very open to this and hopeful that we'll be able to work with them to distribute a survey. She did mention that this would have to be presented to their board, so I'd love input here or from outside of this meeting about that process. I know that meeting is happening next week, so we are hoping to finalize our surveys if that is able to move forward. All of that, so the distribution of the finalizing and distribution of the surveys is really the next big step for our committee. And again, if there is interest, and we should just do it anyway, but to distribute the survey to the whole committee so everyone can take a look and provide some input. Is there anything I've missed from the committee members? Great. Okay. Is there any initial feedback to that? I don't know. We could talk. Any survey-related thoughts?
This is Alina Asimo. I was just asking our DFO whether in circulating that draft, if you circulate it to the entire committee, we'll have to post it online.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want you to think about that.
Okay. Does anyone have any thoughts about that?
So you can go to less than the entire committee without being posted?
Right.
We'll leave me
That
off
at
and then.
Okay. You guys are good?
Yeah.
Any other
I
questions?
have the information I need. Thank you.
Michael?
Regarding the survey, was the idea that the subcommittee would have this is Michael Morrissey, would the subcommittee generate the survey, or would they provide the question and get aggregate data back in terms of sort of who's like putting together the Survey Monkey or whatever survey tool you use?
So that's exact. We have not figured out what tool makes sense. We welcome input there. I was going to speak with, I'd love your input there. I know that you probably have some great thinking around the best way to go about doing that. I think part of what is a related question we still have is how many surveys were going to be distributed to whom. I mean, those questions are the next, the ones for us to resolve. I mean, I think we had in mind some key individuals from a variety of agencies, but not too many, because I'd say there are about 10 to 15 questions on the survey. So do you have any thoughts now, or I'd be happy to get thoughts after.
Well, this is Michael again. I think, I think maybe for flexibility in terms of providing questions to a survey partner like ASAP, which I can't speak on behalf of, but I am a member of their board. I think maybe that gives more flexibility in terms of sort of making sure they can protect participants' anonymity and sort of provide aggregate data back, and sort of gives them the flexibility to kind of pick a tool that works for their membership. I know with a lot of FOIA offices, for example, they have very strict filters in terms of what websites they can access and that sort of thing. And so leaving that in the hands of sort of survey partners, and if they're willing to kind of distribute the aggregate data publicly, maybe that can get around some of the challenges there.
I think that's the idea. That's how we sort of arrived at this solution.
Okay.
So I think, yes, I think that's the way that we're going to explore moving forward. The only question I continue to have is, my understanding is that a lot of the members of ASAP are agency employees, and so I want to make sure that we have a robust response from the requester community, and so I want to continue to explore that and what we need to do to make that happen.
Well, definitely, this is Michael again, would love to help get the word out with the requester community as well.
Great. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to move on to the Vision Subcommittee, and Joan is going to report today since Chris is not here.
Yep. So Joan Kaminer, EPA. We unfortunately were only able to regroup pretty recently with the Vision Subcommittee. We have another meeting tomorrow that will finalize a lot of what I'm reporting out today, with the exception of confirming that we're looking at a 10-year time frame on the recommendations that we're making. We have put the ask out, and thank you for those who have responded, for individuals in the subcommittee to identify which of the areas for recommendation they would like to be identified with. If you haven't responded, please do so. That would be great. And once we've confirmed the individuals with which part of the mission statement they're looking into, tomorrow we're going to be following up at our meeting on our next steps. So hopefully at the next meeting we'll have significantly more to report out. That's it.
Thank you. Questions for Joan? Okay, anyone on the phone? Sarah, Abby? I want to make sure I'm not excluding you guys.
Yeah. We feel included. Thank you. Nothing for me.
Okay. So now, last but not least, Records Management Subcommittee, Jason and Ryan.
Jason Barron. Ryan and I have been talking and discussing with our subcommittee members three areas of interest to pursue. The first is we've been looking into how well the FOIA statute's provision at 5 U.S.C. 552G, which provides for heads of agencies making available certain reference materials, how well that has specifically helped in acting as a requester's guide to records management materials, the records that are actually maintained by agencies. The provision itself talks about the heads of agencies preparing indexes of major information systems, descriptions of major information record locator systems, and a handbook, which is otherwise known as a FOIA reference guide, for obtaining various types of public information. What we are looking at is we're reviewing agency websites for how well they inform the public on the general matter of where to find federal records at agencies, including, most notably, whether the site provides any pointers or links to specific agency record schedules. Our initial impressions are that in many cases, while agencies have done a very good job of providing a kind of step-by-step guide on filing FOIA requests, the materials that have been put up online may not be optimal with respect to providing a roadmap to what I consider the federal records universe, including record schedules. For example, the Department of Justice has a very in-depth site with many FOIA resources online for the requester, both as a general matter throughout the department and individual components. They make information available on major information systems, how to make FOIA requests, Privacy Act systems of records, specific records management pages, open data pages. They even have a page on social media accounts at DOJ. Individual subcomponents have some of these, but it is still difficult to find actual record schedules or for the public to be clear about types of records that they would be particularly interested in, including capstone email repositories. Same is true for a number of other agencies. We'll continue to review agency websites and write up our findings. A second endeavor for us has been to review various types of reports that are either issued by the National Archives or that have been or are supplied to the National Archives, specifically focusing on what NARA takes into account by way of access considerations, including FOIA access, when assessing how well federal agencies are doing in managing their federal records. So these reports include, but are not limited to, that's a lawyer's thing, records management self-assessment, RMSA reports, senior agency officials for records management, SAORM reports, federal email management reports, and other issuances associated with the Federal Electronic Records Management Initiative, known as FERMI. Based on our preliminary review, we believe we are in a position as a subcommittee to make recommendations on additional questions or specifications that the National Archives might consider to make explicit the need to provide for access considerations when managing federal records. Thirdly, NARA has graciously provided the subcommittee with a liaison on the staff of the Chief Records Officer, Lawrence Brewer. His name is Kyle Douglas, and Kyle joined us on the phone in the last couple of weeks to discuss our questions specifically about capstone email policies and how they're being implemented. Kyle was very responsive to the subcommittee's questions, and we look forward to having a lively exchange of information with him and with NARA over the coming weeks and months. Let me also say, speaking only for myself, not for Ryan, that there are any number of other areas that I am interested in pursuing and that I will be making proposals to the subcommittee to pursue. I think we should be getting into the areas of records management training, specifically for FOIA officers, something that I don't believe NARA highlights in their extensive records management training. I'd like to follow up on the remarks that were made at the November 29th, 2018 meeting that I unfortunately missed by being in India with respect to inspectors general representatives coming here and talking about FOIA issues being put on the agenda of CIGI, the Council of IGs for Integrity and Efficiency, and I'm going to suggest that we look into that, how we can work as a whole, as this advisory committee with CIGI and NARA working with CIGI. And finally, look forward to the presentation on additional recommendations and best practice suggestions that were set in the 2016 to 2018 FOIA Advisory Committee's final report. With respect specifically to records management issues, I'd like to pursue that. I've heard it from the other subcommittees today, as to how we can jumpstart compliance with those recommendations. I think that's a very important mission of this subcommittee. Finally, two of us, Ryan and I, are planning to attend something called the FRON, which is a Federal Records Officer Forum, on April 9th to talk about their thoughts on more tightly integrating FOIA concerns in the world of records management. I have other recommendations, but I think I will stop there.
Ryan, do you have anything to add?
No, Ms. Ryan and Jason nailed it.
Well, that was easy. Well, thank you again, everyone, for the reports. I know everyone's been working very hard. I am extremely grateful for that. I did have this moment of panic that I wrote Kirsten a note about. I had promised to some of you that today we would try to roll out a schedule of when we want the final report to be done, and then working backwards with some milestones. And we probably should have done that, and we have not. But we would definitely have it by the next meeting. So hopefully that will help, and we can certainly send it by email in between. And that will hopefully give the subcommittees guidelines to work with. And I believe that now Martha's going to come back up, and she is going to provide us an update on the past FOIA Advisory Committee recommendations. Martha's been tracking them and working directly on a couple of them.
So this will be quick. I know we're all ready to go. So I'm just going to walk right through these like I did last time. The first recommendation
had to do with establishing a CFO technology subcommittee. That subcommittee has been established. Although they were a bit delayed by the furlough, they still are working towards their goals as outlined in the last meeting. And they are currently looking at new ways to gather information, including the possibility of sending a survey to chief FOIA officers to drill down a little further on technology use. So they're moving along. Number 2 was, of course, completed, and this question was included in the chief FOIA officer's report. We will be reporting out the responses we receive once we receive them from OIP. And again, that report's been a little bit delayed by the furlough as well. Recommendation number 3, this is something I'm working on personally. NARA is on schedule to deliver a business plan suggesting a change to the FAR later this spring. We are working to incorporate that into a plan that we're also working on with our Chief Record Officers Council on some records management issues. So this is nice to hear. We're trying to dovetail these as much as possible. If the FAR Council decides to take this up, it'll be assigned to a committee within the FAR for further development. So we'll keep you all posted on that. Recommendation number 4, there's no change. We anticipate that the subcommittee for the Chief FOIA officers that I just mentioned and the efforts to update the FAR are going to cover some of these goals, and we will revisit. Recommendation number 5 and actually number 7 as well. With both of these are in OGIS's court. There's no change from our previous reporting on this. These efforts are likely going to depend on whether we can get an additional compliance team staffer hired and on board in time to complete the research necessary, but it's on our agenda. This one is complete. The recommendation is in OGIS's annual report, and so that one's done. We talked about that one. And finally, just following up on a recommendation from the 2014-16 term, it was completed when the archivist sent a letter to OMB in 2016, but since then, we have continued our efforts to follow up with OMB to assist in moving this forward. So we haven't let it end with the letter. We're continuing to track this, and we'll report back to you all. That's all I've got. Anybody have any questions?
Questions for Martha? Okay, thanks, Martha. I just want to mention 2 quick things before we open the floor up for any public comments. One, and Jason mentioned this to me, so I do want to encourage everyone, we're always looking for suggestions for speakers for our meetings. I don't necessarily feel the need to have a speaker every time, but we feel as though if we can bring you speakers that are helpful to the work that the subcommittees are doing, we really want to facilitate that. So please let Kirsten or me know, and we'll be happy to look into it. The other thing that I'm supposed to remind you about, folders. We need them back. They're now extremely coveted. We are probably not going to be purchasing more because they're expensive. So if we could get them back, we'll recycle them and give them back out to you for our next meeting. So at this time, I think we're pretty much on schedule. Good job, everyone. I want to open up the floor to public comments. I request anyone who wants to make a comment or ask a question to come up to the microphone. Please state your name and your affiliation, if appropriate. And if there are no public comments, then Sheila, do you have any from the live stream? Okay. Anyone else from the audience? Okay. Well, that was easy. So I'm just going to adjourn. Thank you all for your work today. We invite everyone to visit our website for more information about everything that we've talked about today. Kirsten is reminding me that our next meeting is right here in McGowan Theater on Thursday, June 6th at 10 a.m. If everyone can stick around for a minute, I just want to suggest an administrative issue for the next meeting, so don't go anywhere. I definitely want to thank again everyone for their time, and if there are no questions or concerns, we stand adjourned. Thank you. So asked whether